In almost every police department, there's a place where cold homicide cases gather dust. Each box contains unfinished business, evidence, interviews, in its very own murder book. These cases aren't dead, but sleeping. Each one waiting for new leads and a cop to dig out the truth and finally bring a killer to justice. Scottsdale, Arizona, a laid-back bedroom community on the outskirts of Phoenix. It's one of the country's first master-planned communities. But back in the 1970s, while city officials were in the middle of creating the perfect American town, something evil was lurking behind a wall of silence, and it was preying on the city's children. Fast forward to 2006. 32-year-old Detective Hugh Lockerbie is no stranger to hard work. He grew up on a dairy farm in Wisconsin. A good kid with solid Midwestern values, he always knew he wanted to go into law enforcement. But after college in 1997, a local job was hard to come by. So he headed west and joined the Scottsdale Police Department. 6 years later, he's handpicked to create a new cold case unit. Some of the murder cases stretch back before he was born. The job fits Lockerbie like a glove.
I enjoy the history. I enjoy going back into these very deep, very old cases and bringing some justice back to the victim, and to let the person that committed this horrific murder know that they're not going to get away with it.
The first case he opens is Scottsdale's most notorious, the 28-year-old murder book of a boy named Greg Holman.
Greg, come help your mom with the groceries. I'm late getting dinner ready.
It's Sunday evening. Shirley Williams expects to find her 14-year-old son, Greg, at home.
Mom, don't go looking for me. I have to get out of the house for a little while.
Not very long. I'll be back very soon. Don't worry, please. I'll call you very soon. Love, Greg.
Love, Greg.
It's not the first time Greg has gone off without telling his parents where he's going. Just a few months before, he stayed out all night with a buddy and didn't turn up until school the next day. But that doesn't make Shirley less anxious.
Is Greg over there?
She starts calling everyone, looking for Greg.
If you hear anything, please just give me a call. No, he hasn't been home since about 1:30.
Nick, a friend of Greg's, says he last saw him in the park with their friends around 6 p.m. when he left to go home.
Thanks. Bye.
The next morning, Nick swings by the park and sees Greg's bike, but no Greg. When Greg doesn't show up at school, his mother calls the police.
Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate this.
Of course.
Please come in.
The first detective assigned to the case is 8-year veteran Dennis Borkenhagen.
This is the letter he left me.
You know, we got a lot of them, a routine missing person, juvenile, and it seemed like probably 95% of those were, runaways, that they'd take off and maybe 2 days later they'd come home and, they were just mad about something.
Borkenhagen figures Greg's just a teenage boy blowing off some steam. He'll be back. But another 3 days go by, and there's still no sign of him.
I know he left a note, but he wouldn't worry me this way. He said he would call, and it's been 3 days. 3 days, detective.
Listen.
Call it a mother's intuition, but Shirley just knows something happened to her boy.
The thing that got me going was when Holman's mother came into the police station. and said, he did not run away. This is not like him.
Borkenhagen's convinced. He immediately opens a missing persons investigation. According to his mom, Greg can sometimes be a sullen teen, but mostly he's a good kid with a big heart. He's a middle child in a Brady Bunch-style blended family of 9, which he loves. He gets along fine with his mom and his stepdad, and his house is the place neighborhood kids like to hang out.
Come on, move it, dork. Did your mom give you that haircut? Oh, that's real cute. What a spaz.
Knock it off.
He's fiercely protective of family and friends.
You tell that kid, if he messes with you again, he can deal with me, okay?
Okay, Greg. I will.
Greg's a typical 9th grader. He isn't all that crazy about school. He'd rather play sports, ride bikes, and spend time with his friends.
I recall the days were few. That is all that I can do. Feel the carvings in the tree that gave shade for you and me.
He became my first steady boyfriend, my first dance, my first kiss. Greg was an easygoing person. He's very laid back, very sweet kid.
Greg and Susan are part of the popular clique that liked to hang out at the local park.
We were like brothers and sisters. The guys would protect the girls, and we would feel like we were safe with them, and we would just, on the spur of the moment, we'd go camping, we'd go to the river, we'd go anywhere.
People find where they belong or keep on.
But where Greg is now is anyone's guess.
Excuse me.
Detective Borkenhagen starts his investigation with the kids Greg was with on the afternoon he disappeared.
The friends that were there at the park on that date, basically they all had the same story.
Greg spent the early afternoon at his friend Nick's house. Around 4 o'clock, the two boys rode their bikes over to the park, where Greg's bike was later found.
So guess who's getting their license next week?
What? No way.
Congrats, buddy. I know. Forget about that.
Nick left around 6 to go home for dinner.
All right, I'll talk to you later.
Good night, John boy.
Night, Mary Ellen.
Then John Benson showed up, a wacky 15-year-old who liked to call himself Captain Outrageous.
Hey, any of you dudes interested in a little party?
Actually, I gotta go home, dude. Sorry. Yeah. Why not?
All right, the Greginator's in.
Later, bud.
Awesome.
Okay.
Let's go.
That's the last time the members of the group ever saw Greg Holman.
Benson wasn't part of Greg's circle of friends, so before he talks to him, Borkenhagen digs up the basic facts about the teen. From the outside, the Bensons have it all. They live in one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in town. But John, their oldest, is a shy, awkward kid, kind of a loner.
Hey, looking this way.
For years, he's the weird guy, and kids in his class avoid him or make fun of him behind his back.
Smile, say cheese.
Then when he hits his teens, John tries on a new persona, trading in his shyness for a top hat, a cape, and a party boy personality to match.
Who wants to party? Hey, let's do it at my place after school.
Yeah, that'll be cool.
No, it'll be awesome. Come on.
He was a surfer punk before there were surfer punks. He was a lot of fun, and he was generous because his family had money.
Hey guys, it's Captain Outrageous. Who wants to party? Look what I got. Hey guys, looky. Oh man.
I thought he was quirky and kind of off his rocker, but I think I found that interesting because I was, a typical lanky, scrawny, middle-class kid from Scottsdale. Here's this kid that couldn't be more confident in himself.
Captain Outrageous becomes the leader of a kind of teen bad boys club. But most of the self-styled cool kids still keep him at arm's length.
He was an outcast, so we didn't go around him too much, and it was surprising to me that Greg did.
It's time for Borkenhagen to have a talk with the captain.
What time did you get to the park?
I don't know.
And do you remember leaving with Greg to drink beer?
Yeah.
And was anyone with you?
No.
And when did you see Greg last?
Greg had to use the payphone at school and left.
What time was that?
I don't know.
John didn't come out with any information. He had to be asked questions. I really got the impression that he was lying. He was not being forthcoming in what he was telling me.
So Borkenhagen invites him downtown for a lie detector test. In 1978, it's standard operating procedure, even for a 15-year-old kid.
Do you know where Greg Holman is right now?
No.
Are you covering for him?
No.
Did you have anything to do with the disappearance of Greg Holman?
No.
Benson completely fails the test.
After the polygraph, now I know he's our person of interest, and I'm wondering, what do I do now? Polygraphs are not admissible in any kind of proceedings. And we didn't have any physical evidence other than a kid saying that he walked away with him. That's all we had, really.
Borkenhagen's gut tells him Benson knows what happened to Greg, but he needs evidence to prove it. As he questions kids at the high school, he hears rumors about a fight shortly before Greg's disappearance.
They said that Greg had taken some money from him, and that some days later, Benson found out, and he was very irate about that.
But every teen he talks to has a different story.
There was another kid that took John's wallet.
A different kid?
Yeah, Greg was there too.
What did you say was stolen?
A bong.
A bong?
They're just a bunch of stoners.
The only thing the kids seem to agree on is that there was bad blood between Greg Holman and John Benson. But with conflicting stories and no further evidence that Benson had anything to do with Greg's disappearance, maybe the weird guy's just the easiest target for the kids.
Did you hear that he still sexes them? That is disgusting. That's so gross.
Yeah.
What, does he wear a diaper too? I bet he does, and probably picks his nose. That's sick. Ew.
Until one scared teenager quietly steps forward.
It's really, really bad. I heard that John killed Greg.
Killed Greg how?
I don't know. All I know is that he's dead and John put him in one of those forts on the res.
Borkenhagen knows exactly what the teenager means by one of the forts on the res. Scottsdale kids have been digging underground hideaways on the nearby Native American reservation for years to escape the brutal heat and their parents' prying eyes.
Benson had dug some underground forts in the desert area, which was just a block from his house. And they would hang out and drank or used drugs to excess.
The kid doesn't know exactly where the fort is. So Borkenhagen organizes a group of junior police cadets into a makeshift youth patrol.
We had them go over to the reservation and walk that whole area looking for any unsettled earth, recently turned earth or anything where a fort might have been, and came up with negative results.
The secret fort becomes just another dark rumor whispered around the high school. Borkenhagen has a feeling that somewhere in all these wild stories about Benson lies the truth about what really happened to Greg Holman. But without anything solid to go on, his gut instinct isn't enough to keep the case going.
Where do you go from there? It was very frustrating not to come up with anything further.
A few months later, Borkenhagen is reassigned to another department. The next time anyone at the Scottsdale PD looks at the file, Greg's been missing for 3 years. In 1981, Detective Frank Hilton takes over the case. Hilton is one of the best. Solves all his cases. He's old school, a devout Christian who believes that when you cross a line, there's a price to be paid.
My captain said that he wasn't satisfied. He wanted some more answers, and he wanted me to reinvestigate it. see if I can get more information about the boy that he left with.
The minute Hilton opens the case file, he sees the same thing Borkenhagen saw. John Benson. Now it's his job to make something stick to the kid who's been the prime suspect since day one. Hilton starts by talking to some of Benson's old friends. Most are high school seniors now.
Do you guys know if John ever threatened Greg?
Yeah, it was something like that. Because Greg stole from him.
Are you sure it was Greg?
Yeah.
Well, what did he steal?
It was definitely Greg, and it was definitely a bong that he stole.
Bong, huh?
Then the teens add a critical detail that hadn't shown up in the earlier reports. They say John Benson was so mad about the stolen bong, he threatened to kill Greg.
Did John actually say the word kill?
Yeah. To kill him.
Hilton starts hearing how Benson liked taking drugs, drinking booze, and using both as a way to get other boys to hang out with him. But John's not just the weird kid who desperately wants to be accepted.
Once we hung around with him, we found out that he had a very dark side.
The first time Lou Chardell saw that dark side was during a fight between Benson and his own little brother.
Dude,
Yeah, you know what
give it back.
What?
Give it back.
You want this?
Yeah.
You want this?
Yes.
Right here?
Yes.
Yeah.
John! John, you're gonna kill him! Stop!
It was the worst beating I ever seen someone give another kid. It was frightening, because I thought if he could do that to his own brother, what would he do to somebody that really pissed him off?
So Hilton decides to sit down with the now 18-year-old high school senior, determined to get Benson to talk.
John, why don't you tell me about your relationship with Greg?
There really isn't a relationship. I just know him.
Weren't you the last person that saw him?
I don't know.
It became more of a hard interview, and accusing him of doing something to Greg, which he denied. And he kept denying and denying.
Your friend Sam here says that you threatened to kill Greg.
Whatever.
So you had nothing to do with Greg's disappearance?
No.
I don't believe that. All the evidence points to you. I know you had something to do with Greg's disappearance.
I told you everything I know.
Are you willing to swear on the Holy Bible that you don't know anything?
I swear to God I didn't do anything to Greg Holman.
So I jumped back and said, God's going to strike you dead because you just lied.
If I told you what happened, everybody would hate me.
I knew then that he had done something to Greg Holman, and I figured we had him on the edge of confession. I was afraid if I pushed it too much, he's going to say, I want a lawyer.
But just as the floodgates are about to open,
I'll call you tomorrow and tell you why.
the next day passes, and the next, and Benson never calls Hilton back. Hilton's stuck. He's still got nothing but dark rumors tying Benson to Greg's disappearance. So if Benson won't talk, Hilton can't make him.
Next step was just trying to keep track of his movements, continue to interview people if their names came up, and looking at any leads that would surface.
But no matter how hard Hilton pushes, no one gives up anything concrete on Benson.
Deep inside, I knew he had done something with Greg. I didn't know where the body was. There was nowhere else to go with it. I had to sit and wait to see what would come in. The case went stale at that point.
In 1984, Hilton is pulled out of the Detective Bureau to supervise another division in the department. But he still keeps his radar up for John Benson. For 5 years, Greg Holman's case sits on a shelf. Then, on April 18th, 1986, they finally get a lead.
Detectives received a tip indicating that Greg Holman's body was buried somewhere behind the Circle K, which is a convenience market located on the Salt River Indian Reservation.
It's the second time someone is called to say Greg was buried on the reservation. This time, when police go out to search, they make a stunning discovery. An abandoned underground fort. They excavate it completely, but find no sign of Greg's remains.
Nothing was ever found behind the Circle K. That was incredibly frustrating.
By now, cold case detective Hugh Lockerbie has spent weeks combing through the Holman murder book. He notes a recurring theme of Greg's body being buried in a mysterious underground fort that Benson dug. And Lockerbie has a nagging feeling that there's more to the story that no one's talking about. Because after the desert dig, there's another 6-year gap without a single lead. Then in 1992, 14 years after Greg Holman disappeared, Detective Frank Hilton gets a call from out of the blue.
Frank Hilton?
Hi, Detective. This is Lisa. I'm Greg Holman's older sister.
Lisa Holman. Yeah, I remember you. Hey, how's your mom doing these days?
She died. I'm sorry. I've kind of taken over things since her passing.
I'm sorry, I had no idea. She was really a great lady.
Thank you.
Lisa tells Detective Hilton that she and her younger brother were talking the other night, and they had some questions for him.
I just think that it's really strange that nobody in the investigation ever checked out John Benson's backyard. I mean, he had a fort back there.
John Benson had a fort in his backyard?
Yeah, he had this fort where he and the neighbor kids would go drink and hang out, and it was just bad news.
After years of whispered rumors about John Benson's secret fort, it turns out it was right at his house all along.
I was really shocked, for one thing, because had I heard that story when I was investigating it, I would have been in the backyard with a search warrant, and we would have dug up the fort.
Hilton patches Lisa right through to the current chief of homicide detectives, Craig Krasnowski.
I think it took a while for Greg's sister to tell the police about the fort because I think she assumed we knew about it. She said Benson's dad took a backhoe and dug a hole that was almost 7 feet deep in the shape of a T. And shortly after Greg went missing, this fort was covered up with dirt and gravel.
Krasnowski assigns one of his best detectives, Barrett Vassal, to look into Lisa's claim. The Bensons have left their Scottsdale home for a place in Tempe. The people renting their old house let the cops check out the backyard.
Greg, you gotta take a look at this.
In the northeast corner of the lot, we could see a mound of dirt to be the area where the fort was at.
Police immediately begin digging. Charles Merbs, a local anthropology professor, leads the forensic team.
My specialty is the human skeleton, and identification was clearly going to be an extremely important element of this case if indeed bones are found.
The fort's about 8 feet by 8 feet, and scraping away at the dirt, layer by layer, is an agonizing process.
We had to screen every single bit of the dirt looking for any kind of bone, even a scrap of bone.
Is this a human bone? No, that's chicken.
As we got lower and lower and weren't finding anything, I was getting a little concerned that we were going to strike out on this one.
It didn't help that part of the fort had been filled in with what looked like years of debris from long ago backyard barbecues. It goes on this way for hours. Then, after an entire day of backbreaking work, pay dirt.
Find something?
Oh my gosh. You're gonna wanna see this.
definitely human.
From my first look at the bone, I could tell that it was a young individual, not an infant, not an adult, probably somebody in their teens.
That's a rib bone, gentlemen.
Oh, there are more down there?
Let's take a look.
The search becomes a recovery effort. They keep digging and digging through the rest of that day and into the next day, too.
Is life something to capture?
What is that?
It's a cassette tape case.
It's more junk.
If you contain it, are you the master?
They find carpeting, lighters, and lots of liquor bottles. But no bones.
Take the locks and watch them shatter. You find the speed of light, but there is something faster. I feel you closing. I feel your breathing on my skin.
They dig deeper.
It's getting dark again.
About 40 inches down, we heard kind of a crunch.
You find something?
I think so.
What is it?
What we found was a typical black plastic garbage bag, and in that bag were human remains, human bones.
What do you think?
We have a chest cavity here with ribs. It looks 12 to 15, early adolescence.
But there's one major problem. The skeleton is incomplete.
There were very clear saw marks through the third vertebra in the neck, indicating where the head had been removed.
And the head isn't anywhere in sight. Neither are the hands. Without them, it's almost impossible to confirm whose bones they've found.
We pretty much had a feeling amongst ourselves that this was Greg Holman in our minds and in our hearts.
But proving it's Greg in a court of law is going to be a challenge. In 1992, John Does are identified either through dental records or fingerprints. But in this case, police never found the skull or hands.
So I think it was deliberate on his part to take those parts away, so if the body was ever recovered, we would not be able to identify it.
So Detective Krasnowski and his team have to think outside the 1992 box.
The military was doing a new process called DNA, which we were not using in Scottsdale. We had no crime lab. I don't even believe the state was doing DNA.
Detectives try to find a civilian DNA program interested in analyzing the remains. They get lucky at UC Berkeley.
They asked us to send a femur bone and to get blood from the siblings of Greg so they could do a cross match of genetic DNA.
The only catch, DNA testing is so new, the lab says it will take months to get results. While they wait, the detectives pay a visit to the Bensons' new home in Tempe.
This is Detective Craig with Scottsdale.
When we spoke to John Benson's parents concerning the remains being found in their backyard, they seemed to be a bit distraught over that.
The Bensons insist they have no idea how human bones got in the fort. John's dad says he filled in the fort sometime in 1979, when he caught his son drinking there.
Did you happen to look into that pit before you started filling it in?
No.
The Bensons never gave it a second thought. When asked about John, the Bensons tell detectives they haven't seen their oldest son in years.
His parents were not aware of where he was living at. They were not aware of where he was working at. And they advised us that he was in Mexico, but they didn't know where.
We do hear from John. Here's our number.
We'll track him down if we can.
If you contain it, are you the master?
track him down if we can.
Are you the master? 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 Are you the master?
To see if they can shore up their case against Benson, detectives call on Benson's childhood friend, Lou Chardell. They start by telling him about the human remains found in Benson's backyard.
A chill went through me because I had been in that fort.
So, was it big enough to stand in?
Yeah, we could stand in it. It was, at least 10, 12 feet underground.
A fort, it made it sound like it was kind of a silly kid thing. This was like a professionally made sweat lodge. So it was an attraction for the other kids in the neighborhood to, go there and have party time.
At the time, a lot of kids would...
But none of Benson's friends thought there was anything sinister going on down there. It was just a bunch of guys hanging out and partying.
Bernie looks so good today. Hey, man, get this guy a drink.
Looking back, there was only one time that Lou could recall Benson saying anything that was questionable.
How you feeling, John? Outrageous, man. Come on now.
Oh my God.
You know me.
John had had quite a few drinks and probably who knows what else. He, all of a sudden, with his booming voice, said,
"What would you do if I told you there's a body down here?"
You could hear the crickets chirp. And we all just sort of looked at each other like, what the hell? And all of a sudden, this other friend of ours said,
"Hopefully it's a female body."
Yeah. No, man. Seriously. Really. There's a body buried down here.
Yeah, whatever. He buried his cat there or something. Who knows? We laughed it off.
They chalk it up to Benson being high and always wanting attention. But 14 years after Greg's disappearance, Lou wonders if Benson was actually confessing to them. Then, after weeks of looking, the cops track down John Benson. Not in Mexico, but in Tucson.
Do you remember the fort in the backyard of your old house? Yeah, we had a fort, I think. Yeah. We dug it up. You know what we found? No idea. We found a body, John. I don't know anything about a body. Why did your buddies say that you bragged about the possibility of there being a body under where they were? I don't know. Well, kids, who knows? Cut the crap, John. Hey, you know what? Why don't you cut the crap? I'm leaving. I don't have to be here.
There's nothing they can do. All they've got is circumstantial evidence and a bunch of scary stories. So just like the last time cops faced him down, Benson slips out of their grasp. A year passes, and there's not a lead in sight. Then, the long-awaited DNA results arrive.
The DNA testing came back as being 99% positive that the remains were those of Greg Holman.
After 15 years, Greg's case file is now officially a murder book. And police are certain John Benson killed him. He was the last person seen with Greg. The two had argued just days before Greg disappeared, and Greg's bones were found in his backyard.
I was thinking that we had enough to arrest him. I believe it was a prosecutable case.
But after the DA reviews the evidence, he refuses to go forward with an indictment.
I was in shock. I think that finding the victim's body in the suspect's backyard after the suspect said he was the last person seen with him should have been enough to prosecute.
We may have had probable cause, however, we did not have information beyond a reasonable doubt, which is what a jury needs to convict someone in a court of law. Not being able to get a complaint on a case where you think you know who did it and you think you know why they did it, it's a little frustrating, but you keep your nose to the grindstone until you can come up with something else where the county attorney's office believes that they can actually get a conviction.
It's a devastating blow to the case. And it buries Greg Holman's murder book back in the file room for another 10 years. Then in 2006, Scottsdale's most promising new detective, Hugh Lockerbie, enters this epic cat-and-mouse game.
I've read from cover to cover this case 15 different times.
and what happened to Greg Holman that day. You know, something that, you know, you just don't want to wish on anyone, but I mean, to happen to a child, I mean, that really, really brought it home.
Lockerbie's commander asks former investigator Frank Hilton to come out of retirement to help Lockerbie nail Benson once and for all.
I knew where the case was. I knew who the suspect was. We didn't have to focus on anybody else. We were going to be able to solve it. There's no doubt about it.
Hilton and Lockerbie start their investigation where all the other cops have, with the teens that were interviewed in 1978. After so much time has passed, they think they might finally have a shot of digging out the truth from all those swirling rumors.
When we spoke with these kids, or now adults, there was some new things that came forward. It was like one breadcrumb led to another breadcrumb, and puzzle pieces started to go together.
We're going to ask you some questions.
Detectives quickly learn what the problem was. The original detectives were focused on kids the same age as Greg Holman and John Benson. Instead, they should have been looking at kids a couple of years younger, who knew a lot more about what went on in that backyard fort.
I want you to know that you have our word that you will be kept in the strictest confidence and you will remain 100% anonymous.
It was like the time machine went up, and all of a sudden, here's this kid talking to us about what happened. You could see the pain that he has been living with for all these years.
Take a deep breath, concentrate, tell us what happened, just take your time.
The fort was like a chamber of horrors.
It's okay.
We started basically treating him like you would treat a child victim. Very open-ended questions.
You wouldn't believe the things that he did to me.
What kinds of things?
He did sick things. Oh, God.
John Benson, the awkward, oversized 15-year-old, wasn't just a party animal and a bully. He was a sexual predator, and his prey were some of the neighborhood kids he lured to the fort with the promise of a little contraband.
Ever have a real drink before? No. Makes everything feel real nice.
From that point forward, we were able to learn of additional victims that had been in the fort that never were interviewed before, that were victims of John's sexual abuse.
Good, right?
He would get them drunk, and then he would start fondling them, having them touch him. And some of the kids disclosed some pretty horrific descriptions of how they were raped by him.
Benson rightly counted on his young victims being too ashamed and terrified to tell.
One individual, I'll never forget this, described him as a Jeffrey Dahmer type of person. So, I mean, till this day, he didn't want to give me his name because he was so fearful of him.
Do you recall a fort in John Benson's backyard? Yeah. Did you ever spend any time in this fort?
The detectives end up finding several victims of John Benson's brutality. The youngest victim wasn't even a teenager yet when John Benson attacked him.
He did disclose some very painful memories of being molested by John and being abused by John. It was right around 2 to 3 weeks just prior to Greg going missing.
Did you, at the time, tell anybody about what John had done to you?
Yes, one person.
Who did you tell?
Greg.
Greg Holman.
Yeah. He was always looking out for us kids. I mean,
see? That wasn't so bad, right?
Detectives figure one of two things happened the day Greg disappeared.
Hey, any of you dudes interested in a little party?
Why not?
Either John Benson lured Greg away from the park to take advantage of him, or Greg went willingly in order to confront Benson about assaulting his young friend. Next thing you know, Greg's missing. Until detectives find his dismembered body more than a decade later in Benson's backyard. Now cops finally have what they need, a direct connection between Benson and Greg.
Finding out what happened in that fort showed us motive. And so the hard work that Detective Lockerbie and Detective Hilton did on this, and the willingness of those victims to come forward, I think ultimately was a big piece of evidence that prosecution agreed to go forward with.
A warrant is issued for the arrest of John Benson, now 44 years old. He isn't hard to find. He's already in jail.
Hey, I gotta see your face.
He was locked up for child molestation.
Let me see it. All right.
Having worked these type of crimes, usually they stay with the same age, same profile of the victim. Even if they're 40, 50, or 60, they still have this fantasy or attraction to that type of victim.
In 2008, a grand jury indicts 44-year-old John Benson for second-degree murder.
We weren't able to prove how Greg Holman was killed, so we couldn't make it a first-degree case, first-degree murder case.
Eventually, Benson pleads to the lesser charge of manslaughter. That means he never stands trial for the death of Greg Holman.
John Benson never disclosed to us or in court what happened that day in October 8th of 1978. I was hoping that he would have disclosed as to what happened to the rest of Greg's body. I believe that he'll go to his grave with that information.
You know, I think it was hell for the Holman family. And there is nothing you can do for them to comfort them at the time. I think the best gift is to have this case solved, find out what happened to Greg Holman, find out who did it, and that they have justice done in this case.
He would have got what he deserved in 1981 if we could have found the body and arrested him then, after living to be 44, 45, and then get convicted. He's lived with the crime, so now he's going to do some time for it. If he gets out, maybe he'll go straight, maybe he won't.
It's important to know that there are people like this and predators out there that exist today that need help and need to stay out of society. I value myself as a Christian person, but I hate John Benson. I hate him. I have nothing good to say.
After 30 years, Scottsdale police can finally close Greg's murder book.
It's a good feeling to close a cold case, and I always remember a saying from an old detective in New York, and he said, somebody has to speak for the dead, and it's our job to do that. And I think by us pushing forward for those 30 years, we spoke for the victim.
I think that it was sort of a learning experience to realize that wolves can still hide in sheep's clothing, and that someone that we brought into our lives and our circle of friends can turn out to be a complete monster.
Sometimes closure is not the best thing when you find out something like this. In all the years that we had thought he just disappeared, I would have rather had that answer than the one that we have. Greg will always have a special place in my heart. I'm sorry. Just not fair.
During the 1990s in Bridgeport, Connecticut, 4 women were brutalized, violated, and strangled to death.
This is a serial killer. He's leaving a signature on how he commits these homicides.
In a violent city where many murders went unsolved, the deaths were not immediately linked.
They were dead-ended cases. They had no suspects, they had no leads.
10 years later, cold case detectives reran the DNA evidence, and they got a hit.
Then the computer made the link and notified Bridgeport PD that there is a hit, and it belongs to this guy down in Georgia.
Drifter Emmanuel Webb used his charisma to conceal dark and destructive desires.
Webb is the smiling face of evil. Always warm, never threatening, and yet something utterly horrifying is going on behind that facade.
He wanted to kill. He had opportunities to kill, and he didn't miss one of them.
Although his crimes went unpunished for years, a dedicated task force would eventually unmask Emmanuel Webb as one of the world's most evil killers. In 2006, 40-year-old drifter Emmanuel Webb thought he'd committed the perfect murders.
These serial offenders, the narcissism, they think they're smarter than everybody else, and each murder they get away with proves it to them. They begin to think they're infallible.
In the 1990s, forensic science was limited, but it was only a matter of time before it caught up with Webb.
DNA wasn't refined, so you had this sample that was saved with the hopes of, at some point, technology would catch up, and it did.
18 years after Webb killed his first victim, the man the papers called the East End Killer would face justice for what he'd done.
They'll never get out. You know, I mean, that's a death sentence for him.
This killer's story begins on the 9th of April 1966 in Vidalia, Georgia.
Emmanuel Webb's father, who was a disabled veteran, died when he was about 3 years old, and he lived with his mother.
Webb grew up with his mother and older sister in Mount Vernon. In 1984, Webb graduated from high school, and he and his sister traveled north.
He left Georgia to go and live with his sister in Bridgeport, in Connecticut.
He worked as a security guard in Fairfield, which is an adjacent town to Bridgeport. Lived on the east side. The east end of Bridgeport was, I would call, a working class area of the city. People who'd lived there all their lives.
Emmanuel Webb was a hard-working man on the surface, with quite a charismatic manner, very attractive to women. He meets a girl called JD.
He met her when she was kind of lost, and he inserted himself into that situation and ingratiated himself, and they started a relationship.
In 1988, he and 22-year-old JD had a baby. But by this time, Webb had developed a serious drug habit.
There was a second child that came along. He was a problematic father. He didn't pay any attention really to his partner or his children. He was going on binges. He'd go missing for days.
Emmanuel Webb's behavior was not unusual in 1990s Bridgeport. It was a city in sharp decline.
In the 1990s, Bridgeport was suffering a crack cocaine epidemic and all that brings with organized crime and gangs and the addiction and the need to get the money to pay for that addiction and the poverty that was around. That's going to have a massive impact.
It was also just a very violent city. We had high murder rates back then in our cities, mostly from either gang activity or drug activity.
In Bridgeport from 1990 to 1993, there were 287 homicides.
Most of the murders could be linked to gangs or drugs, but there were a handful which did not fit into this pattern.
In April 1990, the fire brigade were called to a car fire in the East End.
And I was one of the first patrol officers that responded. Once the car fire was extinguished, there was a body that was found there.
The body belonged to 39-year-old Sharon Cunningham.
She was found in the car with terrible burns to her face and to her body. She was partially clothed. She was nude from the waist down.
But this was no tragic accident.
She had been ligature strangled with her pantyhose, and then there was also secondary injuries, beating, blunt force trauma to the head.
There was no doubt that the death was an unnatural one.
It was mysterious as to why the car had been burned and how she ended up where she ended up.
Sharon did not drive herself there, did not undress herself. There was an attacker who planned this and who took every step of the way to try and wipe out the evidence of their crime.
Detectives suspected that Sharon had been sexually assaulted.
There was DNA found vaginally.
They found spermatozoa in her, and that was saved and preserved.
The evidence was bagged and recorded, but the investigators had no idea who Sharon's killer was.
A lot of the background work that was done at the time knew where she worked, knew who she frequented, but there was really no suspect.
Two years later, on the 28th of March 1992, police were called to another suspected homicide, just a few blocks from where Sharon's body had been found.
A 29-year-old woman called Minnie Sutton is found dead in her apartment.
Family lady, worked, people knew her, would go to the clubs every once in a while.
She has been brutally attacked. Her 3-year-old son is also found in the apartment, but he, thankfully, is unharmed.
What they discover is Minnie partially clothed with her lower torso naked and no underwear on. She also has suffered stab wounds to her neck, to her torso, and to her stomach area.
A post-mortem revealed crack cocaine to be present in Minnie's system.
The cause of death was multiple stab wounds combined with strangulation. This is a person who died being choked to death while bleeding to death. This is not an attack that could have been survived by anyone.
Interviews with Minnie's family and friends quickly led police to a suspect.
Her boyfriend's brother had assaulted Minnie a couple of weeks before, and 2 days before the homicide, she'd woken up and he was kind of threatening her with a knife. This is the complex issue of dealing with these homicide cases. You can develop good-looking suspects right off the go, only to wash them out, down the line. And that's what occurred here. They're able to rule him out.
The only lead police had was evidence recovered from the crime scene.
The police investigators discovered 2 smoked cigarette butts near the body of Minnie, and they collect them and they preserve them.
In the early 1990s, DNA profiling in criminal investigations was relatively new.
DNA technology as far as getting evidence processed and identifying a suspect isn't as refined as it is now.
Another murder case went cold. A year later, in April 1993, again in the East End of Bridgeport, the body of Elizabeth Gandy was discovered.
Elizabeth was last seen April 16th, and then her body was found on the 19th. It was in an abandoned building that was kind of a crack house.
When her body was found, she was badly beaten.
Elizabeth's body is found with her breast exposed. This is suggestive of a sexual element to the case.
Elizabeth was a 34-year-old mother of two who'd looked forward to welcoming her first grandchild into the world.
One of her daughters, when the attack took place, was in hospital about to give birth to a son, but Elizabeth Gandy never got to see her grandson.
The cause of death is determined as blunt force injuries and strangulation. She is killed being hit and also being choked to death.
The crime scene was a bloody one, and there were clear signs that a struggle had taken place.
There's blood spatter on the walls, up to about 6 foot.
Unfortunately, that building was an abandoned building, so a lot of contamination, a lot of people's DNAs could potentially be present.
There was blood and tissue under her fingernails that was preserved, again, in hopes of DNA analysis would catch up and allow that analysis to come with a match.
Witnesses were interviewed, evidence bagged, but no link was made between the murders and no suspects identified. No one knew that a violent sexual predator was targeting the women of Bridgeport. In June 1993, just 10 weeks after Elizabeth Gandy's death, Bridgeport PD were called to the home of another young woman in the city's East End.
Sheila Etheridge, once again, person that had her own home, worked, social life, family.
She has been missing for a few days.
She'd had a birthday celebration on June 25th. The last known contact with her was a telephone call on the morning of June 26th. Her body was found a couple of days later in her apartment.
Her father and a friend break into Sheila's apartment by climbing through a window, only to discover, tragically, Sheila's body already decomposed.
There are signs of strangulation, including hemorrhages, bruising in the neck. But the decomposition took away the degree of confidence required to definitively call the manner of death a homicide.
A search of the property found evidence that 29-year-old Sheila had not been alone.
There was a beer can found in the house.
A used condom that appeared to contain semen was discovered.
Police inquiries revealed Sheila to be a recreational drug user. They also learned she had a boyfriend.
She was in a relationship with somebody. Nobody really knew his name. They kind of was speculating who it was.
One of the names in the mix was local man Emmanuel Webb. Police quickly ruled him out of their inquiries.
They talked to him, but he is plausible, amenable, helpful, and charming.
By August 1993, 27-year-old Webb's relationship with his partner J.D. was over, and he'd returned to his home state of Georgia. He was living the life of a single man.
He was very attractive to women. I think several of the women who knew him said how extraordinarily attractive and charming he was.
By the summer of 1994, Webb was dating 37-year-old Evelyn Charity. On the 10th of July, Evelyn's colleagues were concerned when she failed to turn up for work.
A friend checked on her and found the body in the victim's apartment on her bed.
She's laying in bed on her side. There's a stab wound to the neck, and there's evidence of strangulation.
She was dressed in a nightgown and like a house coat, no underwear on, and the house coat and nightgown were pushed up, exposing the vaginal area.
Evelyn had been sexually assaulted and murdered. When police attended, they found a chaotic crime scene.
The scene is crawling with neighbors and friends who are there, so potential DNA and evidence could have been cross-contaminated. They had to quickly isolate the relevant from the irrelevant and protect the important from the unimportant.
The killer had stolen Evelyn's car and a gun. When they began looking into her lifestyle and associates, Emmanuel Webb's name quickly came up as someone Evelyn may have been romantically involved with.
The police track down Evelyn's car and they trace it to Emmanuel Webb. When Webb is confronted with the fact that he has Evelyn Charity's car and that she's been found dead, he does something quite astonishing.
He tried to talk his way out of it with, well, yeah, I was there and I had sex with her, but it was consensual. And she died accidentally, and then I tried to stage it to look like a homicide and robbery.
The explanation did not match up with the evidence from Evelyn's autopsy. Bones in Evelyn's neck were broken and she'd been stabbed.
There are many accidental deaths that happen during sex, but you don't break your own hyoid bone by participating in wild sex, and you certainly don't bleed to death through a stab wound.
Facing a murder charge, Webb's legal team offered a plea bargain, which prosecutors accepted.
Webb was allowed to plead involuntary manslaughter. That's not an uncommon thing to plea deal, and it does save the cost of a trial, and it also saves all the uncertainty around whether you're going to get a conviction or not.
In 1995, he's given 20 years. As a result of his conviction in Georgia, Webb's DNA is taken for the first time.
At the time, there was not a national register, but Emmanuel Webb's DNA was stored on the database of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. In late 2001, after serving 6 years of his sentence, Webb was paroled. The 35-year-old was free, and he was on the move once again.
Emmanuel Webb is out of jail. In fact, he's not only out of jail in Georgia, he's gone back to Connecticut.
In the mid-1990s, Bridgeport's police commander set up a homicide task force to look at dozens of unsolved murders from earlier in the decade.
They were charged with probably looking at 207 open cases. And the cases were defined by evidence that was collected that hadn't been analyzed.
They started to do a linkage analysis on the cases. Are these cases related?
There were 4 unsolved murders where the female victim had been strangled. All had taken place within the same square mile. The cold case team wondered if they were looking at the work of a serial killer.
It is very often the case with serial offenders, and especially with serial killers, that they operate in what you might call a comfort zone. If you're going to kill somebody, you don't necessarily want to do it in a place you've never been to before.
So in this case, obviously they were all in Bridgeport, but more importantly, they were all on the east side, all within really almost blocks of one another to a large degree. So they're isolated sort of geographically.
It was an area that was seeing an increase in drug-related activity, gang-related activity, homicides.
Though detectives suspected a so-called East End killer was responsible for a cluster of women's murders, the investigation in the mid-1990s quickly hit a dead end.
The cases were going nowhere. They had no suspects. They had no leads.
In 2000, cold case detectives began taking a fresh look at the evidence.
There was a lot of forensic evidence at these crime scenes. The kind of forensic evidence that now a criminal would avoid leaving. So we had things like cigarette butts and nail scrapings and semen.
There was evidence that was collected that was never sent up to the lab because there was really nothing you could do with it. Some of the DNA is difficult to extract. They sat in evidence for almost 10 years until technology caught up.
The cold case detectives, they collect this evidence and they send it for DNA profiling.
It was a slow process, but when they finally tested in 2005, the State Forensic Lab's findings were worth the wait. Evidence collected from 4 of the East End crime scenes held forensic traces that came from just one person's DNA profile.
So the likelihood of it being the same killer is considerable. The police in Connecticut have all the DNA. All they're missing is the killer.
The profile was run through the US National Database, which since 1998 had contained the DNA profile of many newly convicted serious offenders.
They put the DNA into the CODIS system, into the database, which was obviously a very good thing to do, but nothing. There were no hits at all.
It was a frustrating turn of events. Bridgeport detectives had unearthed a serial killer, but they had no idea who he was or how to find him. In early 2006, the Bridgeport PD Cold Case Unit investigating the suspected East End serial killer finally struck gold.
They get a DNA match.
There was a hit, and it dealt with a death in Vidalia, Georgia, and identified an offender, and that DNA from the homicide in Georgia matched the unknown DNA profiles on the cases in Bridgeport.
The offender had been jailed for the manslaughter of 37-year-old Evelyn Charity in Vidalia in July 1994. 39-year-old Emmanuel Webb. In late 2005, Webb had once again been on the wrong side of the law in his home state of Georgia.
And in November that year, he's arrested on drug possession and also parole violation because he's left the state in which he was supposed to be serving his parole. And so the police arrest him.
Investigators in Georgia took a DNA sample from Webb, which now revealed him to be the #1 suspect for the East End murders in Connecticut.
So now we have a DNA hit, and then we have a suspect that's incarcerated for a similar type of crime.
Hearing the details of Evelyn Charity's death, Bridgeport detectives realized they were looking at a near-identical homicide to the ones they were investigating.
It had both behavioral and forensic linkages.
There was too much of a commonality there.
Bridgeport detectives visited Webb to verify his DNA link to their cases.
So then they had to get a warrant together to get a confirmatory DNA sample. They swab him, get it, and once that came back as positive identification of him, then the case moves forward.
With Emmanuel Webb safely locked up for the time being for his parole violation in Georgia, Bridgeport detectives had time to learn everything they could about their suspect.
Who the hell is this guy, and could he have killed these women? And it didn't take long to realize he literally had lived in Bridgeport the whole time that this happened.
He had ties to Georgia, had family in Connecticut. He was transient. He would go back to Georgia, come back.
He lived in Bridgeport on the east side, many times within blocks of where these homicides occurred. All these women lived on the east side of Bridgeport. They all knew one another. They all were using crack.
By charting Webb's network of friends, the places he frequented, and the lifestyle he lived, investigators were able to establish a strong likelihood he knew all of the victims.
When our officers and detectives went out there to do the canvassing and get background information, everybody knew who he was.
There were witnesses who'd seen Webb socializing with some of his victims.
There was a street there called Stratford Avenue, which had a number of clubs on it and bars. People used to go in there. So they saw him. They knew who he was. Hey, you know what? We saw him with some of these females.
Though the DNA evidence was compelling, prosecutors feared it would not be enough to secure a conviction.
In order to actually produce a viable case in the courtroom, you need much more.
They reached out to the FBI, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation has a behavior analysis unit. It's called BAU.
FBI agent Greg McCrary was assigned to the case.
I was contacted by the state attorney in Connecticut about taking a look at a series of cases that they believed were linked. How could his DNA be at every crime scene and him not be involved?
Agent McCrary was asked if he could identify features of the murders that linked them to one killer. He looked at what he called backcloth.
Backcloth is the overall context in which the cases occur. We're talking about geography, we're talking about victimology, and by that we're talking about socioeconomic issues, commonalities among the victims as well. When we looked at the method and manner of death, strangulation was involved.
Strangulation is a relatively unusual method of homicide.
I did a statistical analysis. In the homicides in Bridgeport from 1990 to 1993, there were 287 homicides. Of those, 7 involved strangulation. 3 of those dealt with male victims, so now we're down to 4 females that were killed by strangulation. One of those cases was solved.
The 4 victims were Sharon Cunningham, Minnie Sutton, Elizabeth Gandy, and Sheila Etheridge.
Strangulation is a very close and up personal way to kill somebody. When men kill each other, they rarely strangle each other. When men kill women, it's a bit more common that they will use strangulation.
Another pattern McCrary identified was that each of the women had suffered additional violence.
There were other injuries inflicted on the victims that were unnecessary to cause death. We had these secondary injuries, in many cases, that involved blunt force trauma to the head or knife wounds and incise wounds and lacerations.
Minnie Sutton was the one that was really mutilated. There were stab wounds there, not fatal stab wounds, but slashings.
She was stabbed in the neck, the left-hand side, her forehead.
From a behavioral aspect, looking at what an offender does that he doesn't have to do is very compelling because it goes to that individual perpetrator and no one else.
Another hallmark of the killer was that each victim had likely been sexually assaulted.
The clothes of the victims had been moved to expose sexual parts of their bodies. So that's quite an obvious sign to us that there's a sexual motivation here.
Semen was recovered from the body of Elizabeth and from a condom near to Sheila. 11 years later, DNA from that condom helped link Emmanuel Webb definitively to the scene.
And that is a key piece of evidence that was identified, collected, properly documented, stored, and eventually it was analyzed. And that gave us DNA material of the person who used that condom. It was a magnificent piece of police work.
Along with the physical links and commonalities between the crime scenes, detectives discovered Webb's behavioral patterns were a fit for the crimes.
The one thing there that we did learn from individuals that had relationships with him, he was rough, all right? It was domestic violence, but it was sexual in nature. It was a pattern of behavior that for him, that was his gratification. You know, it was sexual force, dominance, and violence.
This knowledge suggested a possible motivation for the murders.
He either covered up his sexual acts by trying to kill them, or he knew he was going to kill them and he wanted to have sex with them anyway.
Having found links between the deaths in Bridgeport, prosecutors next needed to link them with the one Webb had already been convicted of: the manslaughter in Vidalia of Evelyn Charity.
The victim in Georgia died of ligature strangulation, and there was cocaine in that victim, and these other victims had cocaine in their system as well, or were known to be doing crack cocaine. And there was injuries secondary to the strangulation that were unnecessary in the Georgia case and the other ones.
The forensics and the profiling made for a strong case, but leaving no stone unturned, the team revisited the files to do some old-fashioned detective work.
In cold case homicides, you're always looking for new evidence.
It's one thing to make an arrest, but then to get a conviction, proof beyond a reasonable doubt, you want to make sure that you've got all the information there. These detectives were phenomenal detectives. They were very, very self-motivated. They looked at it, and they had to go back. You're talking going back 10 years and, you know, finding witnesses, going back, talking to family members.
Among those investigators tracked down were people who'd known 29-year-old Sheila Etheridge, who'd been found murdered in June 1993. They finally confirmed that her mystery boyfriend was none other than Emanuel Webb.
When they started doing their background work, two-edged sword here, right? Hey, yes, he was in a relationship where it kind of got fleshed out. Their family said, hey, they knew it was a rough relationship, it was sexual in nature, and then he was abusive towards her.
Investigators revisited the file of Elizabeth Gandy, whose body had been found in an abandoned building. The walls were spattered with blood, not all of which was hers, suggesting her attacker may have been injured himself.
The other lead that we suggest in those cases is going to the local emergency rooms or primary care centers and ask if anyone has come in with a laceration wound to be stitched up or fixed up.
Detectives dug deep to find out whether Webb had attended a medical facility around the time of Elizabeth's murder.
Remarkably, it was discovered that Webb had gone to hospital the following day.
He was being treated at Bridgeport Hospital for cuts, scrapes, abrasions that were indicative of a struggle.
And that turned out to be his blood at the crime scene, on the victim's clothing and on the wall. So when you begin to put all of this together, I thought it made a very compelling case.
In June 2006, Emanuel Webb, already incarcerated in Georgia, was charged by Bridgeport police officers with the April 1993 murder of Elizabeth Gandy. Convinced he was responsible for 3 more deaths, prosecutors prepared their case, but Webb was not going down without a fight. On the 14th of February 2007, 40-year-old Emanuel Webb was extradited to Connecticut from Georgia. He arrived with his ankles and wrists in shackles.
They were able to get 4 warrants for his arrest for 4 of the homicides, and he came up to Bridgeport to stand trial while he was still incarcerated in Georgia.
As Webb waited in a Connecticut prison for his trial to begin, there was months of legal wrangling over how the 4 murders would be tried.
The prosecution wanted to basically have one trial for all 4 cases.
Agent Greg McCrary's analysis connecting the crime scenes was central to their argument.
Early April 2008, I was contacted by the prosecutor in Bridgeport. They wanted to try these cases together, and they asked if I would be willing to render an opinion.
The aim was to show that the 4 murders had enough in common to be tried in a single court case.
They're tying it together, showing the signature events and why there's a commonality there, and it's not a coincidence and it has to be from the same individual.
The only people believing they shouldn't be tried together was Webb and his defense attorneys.
They wanted each case to be done individually because there was different evidence. And they also felt that if you did them all at once, it would be easier for a jury to just convict them on all of them.
I ended up testifying on May 1st in a hearing before a judge in Connecticut on the cases. And I was linking actually the Georgia case with 4 cases in Bridgeport. At the end of the day, the judge excluded one of the Bridgeport cases.
Webb would not be tried for the June 1993 murder of Sheila Etheridge.
Sheila exhibited enough decomposition to render the pathologist unable to determine the cause and manner of death with scientific precision and accuracy. So although we found hemorrhages to her left eye, although we found bruising to her neck, we couldn't really determine that this was due to a homicide.
Webb's DNA was at the crime scene, on the beer can and in the condom, but neither could be deemed incriminating.
He was in a relationship with her, so it wouldn't be unusual to find a beer can empty there. They couldn't really tie him there as closely and as tightly as they did the other three cases.
The judge erred on the side, I guess, of caution and took that one out, but kept the other three in, which was still a win.
It was a devastating blow for Sheila Etheridge's loved ones. 42-year-old Emmanuel Webb would be tried for the murders of Minnie Sutton, Sharon Cunningham, and Elizabeth Gandy. But at the last minute, as detectives and prosecutors finessed their arguments ready for trial, Emmanuel Webb changed his plea.
They were ready to go to trial, but Webb pled out. He didn't want to go to trial because the evidence then was overwhelming.
On the 22nd of May 2008, Emmanuel Webb cuts a plea deal with the Connecticut authorities.
Webb pled no contest to the three murders. A month later, he was sentenced. The state had not proven the aggravating factors, such as rape or kidnap, needed to make the murders death penalty cases.
He was sentenced to 60 years in prison, 20 to life on each of the three cases, as I understand it, to run consecutively, one after the other.
So basically, it's a life sentence.
First, however, he would return to Georgia to serve out his time for the parole violation there. His sentence at Hancock State Prison ended in July 2014.
As of then, he was turned over to Connecticut Corrections to serve the three sentences for those homicides.
When Webb's sentence was handed down in a Bridgeport court on the 25th of June 2008, there was applause from his victims' loved ones. It had taken 18 years to get them justice, and the dedication of a committed team of detectives.
It was tireless work. And for me, as a supervisor, as a commander of that unit, you no more pride than to have distinguished detectives do what they did and bring these cases to a successful culmination.
Webb was a dangerous predator who hid in plain sight.
Emmanuel Webb was a man who was actually the devil, hiding around the corner or in the coffee shop, and you never suspected him. He remains, for me, literally one of the most dangerous killers in America, because he's shown no remorse, no reticence, no regret, no conscience. That makes him a very evil man indeed.
It took many years to bring Webb to justice, but for those involved, it was worth the wait.
I've had cases that have taken over 20 years to solve, but it doesn't matter. I mean, as long as you can solve the case, it's the perseverance. It's getting justice for the victims and holding people accountable for their behavior.
You'd always get calls from family members, on the anniversary dates of the homicide or their birthdays. It's not going to change anything, but you're bringing them a little bit of closure, and they get justice. That's what you try to do. You try to bring justice to the family and to the victim themselves.
Emmanuel Webb was known as a man who liked to party and a man who could charm his way into women's lives. But he abused their trust, murdering his victims in terrible acts of sexually motivated violence. After escaping justice for years, he was finally unmasked as one of the world's most evil killers.